Good evening. My name is Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute. To begin our program, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which UC Davis is located. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of Patwin people. Today, there are three federally recognized Patwin tribes: Catchell Dahe Band of Winton Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal Dahe Winton Nation, and Yoka Dahe Winton Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. The Robert Mondavi Institute strives to provide the public with insights into the food and beverage innovations at UC Davis. Tonight, we focus on the Olive Center, one of the centers of excellence here at the Institute. Before we begin, let me mention that your questions are welcome. Please use the Q&A tool to submit your questions. Our guests will try to answer as many as feasible at the end of the presentation and tasting. Our guest this evening is Javier Fernandez Salvador, the new Executive Director of the UC Davis Olive Center. He oversees education, outreach, production, and strategy here at the center. He served as an assistant professor in the Extension Service of the Oregon State University, where he led a multidisciplinary team investigating olive propagation, cold hardiness, and fruit production. He has had extensive experience in developing research strategies with growers and processors in many different crops. He's fluent in Spanish and in the final stages of receiving a PhD from Oregon State University. Tonight, we're going to hear about Mr. Fernandez Salvador, taste some of the Olive Center's oils, and then learn what the center is up to this year. Good evening, Javier. How are you doing?
Andy, great to see you. How are you doing?
All right. So I gave a brief introduction, but I'd like you to give a little bit more detail on your background. For those of us, for many in the audience are meeting you for the first time.
Wonderful. So first, I wanted to say hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here virtually with you. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. My training in general has been as a horticulturist and a plant physiologist, working mostly with berry crops, blueberry, blackberry, strawberry, and raspberry. And I've done a little bit of work with the tree fruit as well, mostly sweet cherry, and worked a lot with the organic industry for the past 15 to 20 years. I was an assistant professor at Oregon State University, working with the Small Farms program. And that's where I got my feet wet with olives when I was approached by some growers that wanted to expand and really bring the science-based knowledge to the crop. And that's when I actually met Dan Flynn, our previous director here at the Olive Center. And I came over here for the different classes, which, by the way, are restarting next year. That's the sales pitch for you. And became an olive aficionado. Once you will start, if you have tried olive oil before and you are a professional taster, the tasting that we're doing today is going to be a little bit basic for you. But if this is the first time you're tasting and trying olive oils, you will get immersed into it and hopefully continue to do it in the future.
Good. So, I've grown up in California and familiar with olives. They're all around Davis. And when I was growing up, we always heard that, a good place for olives was up near Corning and Orland, a little north of here. I know there's a lot of olive trees up there, but, they're all around California. But the idea of growing olives in Oregon is kind of unusual. And I guess I'm just checking to make sure, was this a really good idea to grow olives up in Oregon?
Well, that's a great question, Andy. As you know, olives are originally from the Middle East and Persian region. And they have spread across the Mediterranean, and now, of course, over the centuries and then over the millennia, really. And now also to other regions that have similar climates to that Mediterranean climate. in South America, Australia, South Africa, and as well, of course, California, where we are blessed to have this climate where it has a long dry season where the fruit can ripen, but also the winter where they get their chill period met and produce a great crop. Now in Oregon, if you see the map on the right, on the top right, you have that limit of the 45th parallel, and Oregon is right there. So the equivalent to where France is, right? And it's a little tricky because we do have the nice Mediterranean summer, but we also have the Pacific Northwest, rainy and cold winters. That's where the challenges come from. And then also, if you just compare the production, and I put one figure over there for you, the amount of acreage grown in 2009 here in California, both table and olive oil. But in Oregon, at that time, the acreage was very minimal, very, very small, 120 acres. So the size of a small farm or a small to medium-sized farm here in California.
Yeah, let's see, it's at a 0.5% maybe.
Yeah.
Well, what's the story in the winter? What are the problems in the winter then growing olives there in Oregon?
Well, interesting. But let's go over a little bit of what happens over there, right? And the picture that I'm showing right now will basically tell you the story. The one advantage that we have in the Pacific Northwest is having that water that is available for the plants, which would produce a nice vegetative growth in the spring and maybe continue through the summer and then again in the fall. But as soon as fall hits, you start to see these colder temperatures that, and I put a little bit of guidance here that you see from different publications that are available online, and peer-reviewed papers as well, where you start to see a small limb damage at around 22 Fahrenheit, and then large limb damage and whole tree death at 15 Fahrenheit. And the temperatures in Oregon, although they don't necessarily get to that cold every year, for the past 3 years, we haven't gotten really below 22 in the Willamette Valley area, which is not that bad. Very little cold damage in the past 2 to 3 years. But then when you get that 1 year every 5 or 6 years where you get to 15, you can lose a big part of your trees. And if you see in the picture, we usually deal with snow, but these last year we dealt with an ice storm that froze very big icicles on all the branches and just started splitting trees apart. So now they're the challenges that people are dealing with, and they are producing a commercial crop at this point.
All right. Well, I won't question your sanity anymore, but let's hear a little bit more about your specific, your PhD or your research into olives up there. What were you trying to accomplish with your research program?
Great. So this is actual, I led a multidisciplinary team. This was not my PhD research. My PhD research was in blueberries. But for this project, we basically, some growers reach out to us with orchards that they already had established and brought some priorities on the list. And one of the first things that we wanted to do is conduct a grower survey. So we got a little bit of support from the university, a little bit of funding to get the project started. And we conducted and interviewed the growers in the region. Then we got a larger grant from Western SARE that started and founded what is known now as the OLEA project, which is olive research for Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And the three components really for that project were the on-farm propagation, orchard establishment, and as well as cold hardiness. I didn't list cold hardiness here because that's the part of the project that is continuing right now. And one of my colleagues, Neil Bell, is actually will continue to evaluate all of the different varieties. I think he has around 110 accessions at this point, maybe 60 cultivars. Some from the collection here, the National Germplasm Collection here at Wolfskill, actually.
Uh-huh. Well, what was the results of the grower survey?
So when that's one of the fields of the farms that you see over there. And I wanted to put this picture because it presents a completely different type of tree to what you see here in California. The olive naturally grows as a bush, as you see it right there. Some growers have decided not to train them specifically to have a single trunk or as a trellis as you would see in a super high density orchard, because as the grower told me at that point, the winter does your pruning. If you see that plant right there, if the winter gets cold, a lot of those branches will die, and then the farmer can come afterwards and do the cleaning of those limbs, and then, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, the pruning will be done by nature, right?
Right.
So when we conducted that survey, we interviewed the majority of the producers, which are located in Yamhill, Polk, and Marion counties, right? And then there's a small cluster of growers also located down south. But this is really all of the production will be in what is considered eastern or western Oregon, because right where you say the word Marion written, that's where the Cascade Mountains are, and everything to the right of that or east of that basically would be like trying to grow olives in Colorado. it gets just way too cold and it's not feasible in that region. And then on the two pictures that you see on the right, some growers started with a high, I don't want to call it super high density necessarily, but higher density planting with trellising, very similar to what you would see here in California. But then they discovered that with the varieties that they chose originally, they didn't work as well. And then other growers decided to go with that single trunk, the bottom right picture, where you see that starts to form this single trunk at the base, and a lot more spacing between the rows.
Well, which trees or varieties are actually suited for Oregon then?
Suitability, that's a very interesting question. So this is a research from master's thesis of Tessa Barker, one of my students. And when she conducted her master's work, she interviewed the growers and asked them about the different varieties that they grew. And then if you see that list in the bottom, there is quite a bit of variety between different orchards. Some estimate that there might be around 40 to 50 varieties generally grown in Oregon. And some of them worked well for them, some of them didn't. The initial larger plantings that focus on the super high density, they grew the three cultivars for that, Arbequina, Arbosana, and Koroniki. So the most widely grown cultivar right now in Oregon is Arbequina. Everyone really has Arbequina, just because it was left over, but it was also because it is supposed to be cold hardy. Now, cold hardiness for California, it's a little bit different than cold hardiness in Oregon. So growers discovered that although Arbequina does survive, it's not as productive as it should be. And it grows quite different because of the cold winters. So they started focusing on maybe growing some Tuscans as Frantoio, Lecchino, and also other cultivars like Aglandau, for example, from France, as well as evaluating a variety of other cultivars. So the question of what cultivars can be grown in Oregon, it really depends on the research that they're conducting, and we'll hopefully have an answer for you in about 10 years.
So it sounds like it is viable that at least growing olives for olive oil production in Oregon is a viable business?
Yes, so there is now, I believe, one commercial mill that processes the fruit for everyone in the state. And they have been doing this crop for more than 10 years. One of their largest production is olives. A lot of their acreage is dedicated to that right now, and they continue to expand. So one of the advantages of the oil there is that it's very rich on phenolic compounds. Mm-hmm. And of course, because of our shorter growing season, it gets harvested green. And with a little more underripe than what you would see here in California. And I have a sample for you right here. If you see this very dark oil, that is an oil from Oregon that we show, and I will show you a comparison later with what we have here in California with the oils that we grow at Wolfskill.
So what's the take-home message from your research program then?
Well, I wanted to show you some basic figures so that you can see the differences between Oregon and California.
Okay.
So the fruit yield, because of all of these challenges, shorter growing season and everything, as well as rains during pollination. And then look at these figures with a little bit of a grain of salt, because if you were looking at more mature trees of other orchards that have larger trees, that yield would go up. This is an average of the growers we surveyed during that year in 2016 and 2017. And look, it's a fraction of what can be grown in California, right, on average. And then the same for fruit production. It's a very, very, very small amount. Probably 1 or 2 farms can grow a similar amount here in California for the entire state in Oregon. But when you look at oil yield, the oil yield is not that far off. In a good year, it could definitely yield closer. And the quality, it's an oil that is going to be marketed green and very high in phenolic content, which is for people that know a little bit more about oil and connoisseurs of the oil quality. It's a desirable trait, as we will talk about later tonight. But then, yeah, when closing and talking about the message of what we did here, I wanted to show this picture on the left. That's one of the overwintering structures, and people are buying plants, small plants from California, or propagating themselves. That's another aspect of the project, working on the propagation on farm. But then if you see that the weather is going to get cold, you move them indoors, and you have the possibility of putting a small heater to maintain the temperature and avoid your vegetative growth to die. And then the 2 pictures that you see on the right, that's our 2 research plots from the university, where we planted those trees, got mild winters, and the growth is actually, those are 2-year-old trees. The growth is not that far off from what you would see here in California. So it's a viable crop. We produce high quality, but it still needs to be researched and had some more be looked upon in the future to continue to be viable.
Right, right. Well, let's move on to the olive oil tasting then. And I'm, of course, familiar with tasting wine, but with tasting olive oil, it seems like it must be a different game. So what when you taste olive oil, what are you trying to get out of the evaluation? Can you explain that?
Definitely. Thank you, Andy. And just to let you know that I got introduced to oil about 5 years ago when I took the class from the center here at Davis. And it's really great that we're going to be able to offer it again next year. COVID has delayed our class schedule quite a bit. And if you really want to learn a lot more about it, I invite you to come. We'll have this class available next year and hopefully many more classes in the future. But the goal for today is to identify the basic steps that you need to evaluate an extra virgin olive oil. Today will be, if you have purchased the oil from the UC Davis stores, our two products, the Wolfskill Reserve, as well as the Gunrock. These are both extra virgin, and we will learn how to look at the sensory steps to evaluate one of these. And then also, I want you to learn and determine the different aromas, flavors, and sensations that you will get, and how to describe them after you've tried the olive oil. So a couple of the items that you will need for the tasting is 2 wine glasses, right? And I will tell you what the panels, taste panels, and more professional tasters use. But for today, we're just going to use a couple of wine glasses. Hopefully you have them available. Then we will need a piece of paper or a plastic lid to cover the wine glass. This is because I will explain this to you in a little bit, but we want to be able to have those volatiles trapped in the airspace of the glass before we taste it. And then, of course, a good glass of water. Some of these oils can become quite pungent and peppery and have produce this tingling sensation in the back of your throat. So you want to have some water available to clean your palate. And then, of course, let's talk a little bit more about palate cleansers. We're going to try 2 oils tonight, the GunRock and the Waldskill. And you want to be able to clean your palate in between. So things as plain crackers, bread, or even tart apples serve as a really good tool for this. Finally, please have your notepad available so that you can write your first impressions and take the notes on the tasting and all of the aromas and flavors that you're getting from the oil. So the first part that I'm going to do today is describe the process, and then we'll get into the tasting. And today we will, I'm going to be trying from the tasting from and pouring from the 250 ml bottles of Waldskill Reserve and GunRock, both extra virgin again. And in the case of the Waldskill, it's all state grown from our own orchard this year, the same with the GunRock, but they're a little bit of a different composition because we have around 12 different varieties in that orchard, and our team chooses how to develop that blend that we're going to bottle for you and make available at the UC Davis store. So let's begin with what is extra virgin olive oil. A lot of you might be asking yourselves this question. And the reason to mention extra virgin is because there are different qualities in oil, one being virgin, and then a lower one that is considered lampante. Those 2 qualities are also available to purchase. So when you look at your bottle and it's an extra virgin oil, that you're choosing the highest grade of quality available that meet both chemical and sensory qualities for it to be under this category. The oil definitely has this fruity fruitiness quality to it, and is also completely free of defects of flavor or odor. So there are taste panels that actually evaluate the oils to confirm that they are and they fit the extra virgin category. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the blue glass. This is the blue glass that you can purchase from different vendors. And hopefully one day we'll be able to offer it to you ourselves. And this is when you're doing a tasting and evaluating different oils, it is recommended that you do a blind tasting. It's better not for you not to know what you're trying before you try it, right? And then a color is not considered an indicator of quality. So that's the purpose of using this blue glass. Once you pour the oil there, you cannot see what color it is, because there's been studies that show that if you're able to see that color beforehand, it has a very, very attractive color, you might grade it with a better grade than it actually is, because the grading, the quality that you give the oil should be based on aroma and taste, not necessarily on color, right? And
yeah. So I just want to interject here that, in fact, in wine tasting, sometimes we use glasses to hide the color. In that case, we actually use black glass because of you don't want the taster to know sometimes you don't even want to know, is it red or white wine? And if it's red, the amount of redness definitely influences evaluation. So if you want to avoid that interference of the perception of color, you have to hide that. And it's very clear in all food products. We're very susceptible to perception of color. So good. I can see that even in olive oil, we want to avoid that bias as well.
Right. And thank you, Andy, for mentioning that. And I hope that all of you become really interested in olive oil after tasting tonight. And at some point, if you do, it's a very useful tool to have when you're comparing different oils. And it basically takes that bias that you might get from the color of the oil. Okay, so when we're talking about tasting, the optimal temperature for you to evaluate and release all those aromas is 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And the wine glass that we will be using today is a good substitute. Today you will be able to see that color, but and I will show you the process of how to go about getting that oil to that temperature so that the volatiles are released. And then also it's very, very important for you to have an odor-free environment for tonight. So if you were cooking and making some eggs and bacon, it's probably not the right place for you to be tasting tonight. But it's always when you're tasting, have that odor-free environment. And then when you're starting, it's probably good that you start just looking and tasting 2 or 3, but not a maximum of 5 oils, because you're starting to train your palate. People that do competitions and evaluations of different oils might be able to taste more oils in that day, but it's important for you not to overwhelm your senses. So let's start. If you want to start and get involved in these, start with 2 or 3, but not a maximum, not more than 5. So how are we going to taste today? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the 4 S's. And this is a simple way of understanding how to do your tasting today. So swirling, this is comprised of these 4 points: swirling, sniffing, slurping, and swallowing. Now, when we talk about swirling, it's going to be a little bit different than the swirling that Andy might be doing for wine. But the swirling is basically a motion that we will do at the base of the glass so that we can bring the temperature up. Because if you remember, for storing oil, it's also a very important thing for you to know that not to keep it on your windowsill or next to your stove, because unlike wine, olive oil needs to be consumed quick after it's open. The contact with oxygen, oxidation, the contact with light, and the contact with higher temperatures reduces that quality of the oil, and it can make it rancid pretty quick. So it's not like a wine bottle where you can store it for a few years and then it becomes better. Olive oil declines and declines over time. So buy it and use it as quick as you can. So if you're storing it in a cold environment, this swirling motion of the glass, the cup, will make it go up to the right temperature. Then after that, once you've kept, of course, it has to be covered, but you've kept your oil, you brought your oil to the right temperature, you're going to do your first round of sniffing. So take off the lid and you will try to, there's 2 schools of thought I would call it in these. Some people like to do short sniffs, and some people like to do larger sniff, cover it, get your first impressions, and then open it again and smell a couple more times and see what you're getting from that oil. Okay. After the sniffing, we are going to go into the slurping. And this time, because we had a practice run with Andy and I slurped the first time that I was trying, I couldn't stop coughing. And I'll tell you a little bit about the coughing in a little bit, but I'm going to use water. So the slurping happens when you're not necessarily going to be slurping from the glass, but when you put some oil in your mouth, you will be doing some slurping for retronasal smelling, if you call it like that. And what we do for that is put a little bit of oil in your mouth, and then you slurp some oxygen or some air inside so that it mixes and it releases more of the aromas. And the reason for this is because it's very important to have that retronasal movement. And for that retronasal movement, as you saw me do, you bring the air in your mouth that is already been coated with the oil and has mixed with your saliva. It mixes the oil, it goes to the back of your throat, and then you expel the oil through your nose. And that will bring you, that will open a whole new level of possibilities that you might not get just by sniffing it from your glass on that first glance. So it's very important for you to do this process afterwards, okay? And this is also a movement that is also done quite a bit in wine tasting and for other liquors. Andy, if you want to add something about retronasal?
No, that's okay.
Great. So yeah, this really gives you that option of opening every olfactory receptor that you have to really perceiving all of those phenolic compounds that are released by the oil. Great. And then after that, we swallow. So it's quite a bit of a process. After that, you've coated your mouth and you start swallowing. Now, the first thing I'm going to recommend is that you do that with a small amount of oil. We'll be doing all of the pouring, and I'll show you all the entire process for our 2 oils that we have. But don't start with the large amount, because otherwise it will really make you cough. And maybe some people, when they've done it for the first time, it might turn them off. So start with a smaller amount, and then maybe when you can try a larger amount later and see if that makes you cough. Great. So when we are done with these, we're going to take, we're going to open the first bottle, put it in our glass, proceed to do all the different steps that I've described. After that, I want you to take your notes. That's a very important part of the process. And Andy will be polling you on a few things that we wanted to know after you've done this tasting on these 2 oils that we're going to try. But after taking your notes, it's very important for you to remember what comes to mind right away as you are smelling, sniffing, and slurping, right? Then you can also, a quick thing to mention here, and this is a project that hopefully the Olive Center will take on in the future, is creating our own olive tasting wheel that we want to have available for the public. And in these different tasting wheels that are available, you have a variety of different aromas and a variety of different tastes that are available. And it's a good reference when you're starting to be able to describe what you're getting. And then you consume a little bit of your apple, consume a little bit of your bread, drink some water, and then you will be ready for tasting the next oil. Andy, so what do you think?
Well, it actually, compared to wine tasting, it's actually quite similar. In wine tasting, you generally look at the color of the product first, if you're not trying to hide it. And then after you slurp, sort of, then professional wine tasting, you actually spit instead of swallow. But the basic process is pretty much the same. Yeah, it's similar to what I'm used to, except it's oil.
And I probably would have asked you to have a spit cup, but you will be trying 2 great oils tonight. So but when you are learning and getting trained on recognizing defects, you will have to have a spit cup, because some of these oils could be quite intense on their defects, and you don't want to necessarily, or be of a lower category version of, or lampante, or even not fit for human consumption. So you want to be able to spit that oil after you've tasted it and or started the process. So let's great. So we will start today with the Wallskill Reserve. Andy, do you have yours ready? Ah, there we go. Great, great. So I opened the bottle a little bit earlier, but I recommend that you pour about 1 to 2 tablespoons in your glass, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to pour a little bit more, and because I want to show you a quick difference that I noticed earlier today, because we were talking about oils from Oregon, right? Look at the color here, and look at the color there.
Wow.
Yes, there is quite a difference. That is because of our cold winters, Andy, and our shorter season. Yeah, it stays green. It's very, very pungent. So that's something that you will see with tasting oils from Oregon.
All right.
So now, and that also, it's a good example of why we don't want to do this when you're tasting professionally, because these, when you look at these 2 colors, will bias your opinion. Mm-hmm. So, great. We put it on the glass. Hopefully everyone is doing this at home. And we are going to, what was your first step? Andy, help me out.
Swirl.
Swirl. So we're going to swirl it in our glass, right? And warm it up. How do you know that the temperature has been reached? Is because the glass and the oil won't feel different from the temperature in your hand. So once you know that that temperature is being reached, the oil is ready to be
Mm.
tasted, to be sniffed. Step number 2. So I'm going to do it like this, but take off the cap, and then I'm going to take 2 or 3 small short snips, okay? And then you can warm it up again a little bit. And please write your impressions. I'm not going to tell you my impressions yet. I'm just going to show you the process, because Andy will be quizzing you in a little bit. And then maybe you want to do it again. The second time I want to do a longer sniff. Okay, so then we take our notepad and we write the impressions that you have on that first oil. And of course, this is not a blind tasting. You know that you're trying the Wolfskill Reserve that you should have purchased from our store. If you haven't, we still have some available. Now we're going to proceed to the slurping part. Andy?
Okay, so we want to pay attention here to what you're smelling, because our question about this oil has to do with the aroma of the oil. So pay attention to what you're smelling, both from the glass and also from your retronasal movement. You want to see what is it you're smelling. With the next
Great.
oil, we'll focus more on the taste in the mouth.
Yes, but we will complete the whole process on this one. So let's proceed to slurp. Okay, so when you release that oil from the back of your throat and you release the air through your nose, you're going to get a little bit of a different aroma perception than what you got originally just from sniffing it from the glass. And then when you swallow, we did the 2 last steps here, slurping and swallowing. Hopefully you got that tingly sensation in the back of your throat that sometimes will make you cough. And this is a quality that you see in multiple high quality oils, including ours. So that is the step for our first oil. Andy.
All right, so let's, Dan, would you please put up the poll now for the Wolfskill oil? We're asking you to signal what the first thing you smelled, and that's from this first list. So there's actually 2 lists here. So did you smell cut grass, apple, tomato leaf when you got that first impression? And then perhaps after you had it in your mouth for a bit, maybe you got a second impression, and that's on the second list below. One of the things you picked up on with your second impression. So we've got 2 questions to answer: first impression and second aroma. We can see the numbers are rolling in here, Javier.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
So we'll wait a few more seconds here for people to fill this out.
Great.
I still got numbers coming in. They're rolling in.
I'm still impressed with the color difference. I did not expect that. Wow.
It looks almost, I mean, I almost can't see through the Oregon oil. The picture that's on the camera there, really can't see anything through there. All right, well, I think we've gotten pretty much all the answers we're going to get here. So I'm going to ask Dan to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like fresh cut grass is a pretty popular answer. What do you think of that, Javier?
That's wonderful. That's exactly what we were expecting.
So I see nobody picked pomegranate.
Wow, I don't know why that is. Well, the reason for that is because Shirley, which I will introduce in a little bit, she is the assistant director to the Olive Oil Center, and I were we're going to pick a flavor that, an aroma that is not at all in this oil, and see if we can trick the audience. But the audience is smarter than us. And I'm very, very glad to see this. The fresh green olives, I'm glad that some people picked that. Fresh green olives, if I was having this conversation with Andy earlier, and fresh green olives are hard to smell because if you just pick them from the tree, they don't smell like much. But then if you cut through them, their aromas again are released. And they can be sometimes even milky or juicy, very watery. But their aroma is released at that point, and not a lot of people have necessarily smelled that before.
Well, then the secondary aroma here, we have a lot of tomato leaf, still fresh cut grass. What do you think of that?
Wow, the tomato leaf. Wow, the secondary aroma is very interesting, Andy, because we did notice some tomato leaf, and tomato leaf is hard. For me, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I worked in tomato greenhouses for a little bit. So I remember that smell vividly. But not many people have had that close contact with tomato plants all the time. Although tomato is a very popular aroma, the tomato leaf is quite a bit distinctive and different from what you would smell in an actual tomato.
Well, you know, and Javier, here in Davis, many people have tomato plants. And so they probably are familiar with the smell of tomato leaf because they've worked on the plants and maybe brought some leaves into their home. So
and that is a very good point, Andy. And I tell you, one thing that I love about California is the tomatoes taste magnificent in the mouth.
a little better than those Oregon tomatoes, perhaps.
Yeah, a little sweeter. Let's put it that way.
All right.
Great. So
all right, well,
let's move on.
Yeah, let's close that poll there, Dan, and we'll move on to the Gunrock.
Great. So we are moving on to our second oil. So get your glass again, and we're going to pour our Gunrock. Right? On full transparency here, I am actually pouring the Gunrock. But again, I'm going to pour a little extra just so that you can see. Let's do a color comparison between the three glasses this time. So some people have told me that the Gunrock is a little bit darker than the Wolfskill. And I don't know if I can tell the difference really. But then, yeah, big difference there. Great. So pour yourself some oil. We're going to cover it, and we're going to proceed to do the same thing that we did before, right? So we're going to do a little bit of a swirling.
So here on the poll, we're going to be asking about the taste in the mouth, not the aroma so much, but what's the perception in the mouth? And there's various things you can taste. There's maybe some bitterness. You have your four tastes, your saltiness. Probably not going to get much of that. Sweetness, maybe a little bit of that. Sourness, perhaps some of that. But then there's also physical sensations, astringency, and then spiciness, burning sensation. And of course, with olive oil, you get what's called pungency, which is sort of the burning in the back of the mouth. I always notice that with fresh olive oil. So what is I'm going to be asking you again, what's your first impression when you put the oil in your mouth, and then what's the secondary taste that you pick up on?
Great. And I do suggest that this time you try a little bit more oil, even if it makes you cough. So let's go. Let's start with the aroma. And I'm gonna wait a minute and give it another sniff. And then please go ahead and write all of your impressions. Okay. Let's do a little bit of the slurping and then tasting as well. And focus on your taste this time, please. Always makes me cough a little. Andy, I don't think you're swallowing enough. I'm just kidding. Okay.
I'm trying to be careful because I have to be speaking in a moment here. Let's get the poll up and see what people are thinking about the taste of the Gunrock olive oil. Okay, this is more of a competition. We've got several answers dominating.
Out of curiosity, how many answers are we getting? I don't think I can see that.
We're getting responses on everything. Not many on some, but we're getting lots of bitter, pungent, nutty, and peppery on the primary taste, and then pungent and peppery are dominating on the secondary taste. So let's give them a few more seconds. What did you pick up there, Javier? Not to bias anybody, but
now that we have the answers, I didn't get a lot of bitterness, honestly, but I have been told before that I am a little bitterness less. I can't really taste the bitterness sometimes, which is really odd. It has to be quite bitter for me to taste it. So.
All right.
So then I thought it was quite pungent and nutty as well.
So can you see the results now?
Yep.
Okay.
We have the results right there.
I didn't notice as much pungency on this oil as the last one. And certainly up front, it was a smooth, and I would say nutty might be a good descriptor. But once I started swallowing it, then I really got the pungency for sure. But it wasn't as irritating as the first one.
That's very interesting. And the first time I tried the Waldskill and then the Gunrock, I thought the Waldskill was more robust. The second time I tried it, it was completely the opposite. So when you have oils that are similar and both come from our own orchard, and the differences in makeup or the different cultivars are not huge. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a matter of perception at that point. But I'm very interested that someone found it citrusy, because we put citrusy as something that you would not find. Again, similar to what we did with the pomegranate before. But yeah, I see a couple of responses on the citrusy.
All right.
What about the secondary, Andy?
A lot of pungent and peppery.
Yeah, peppery for sure.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have to move on.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, hold on. Let me see if I can close the poll. Okay, great. Right. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, now that you've tried our oils, just to remind you that the center is self-funded. And what I mean by that is we get a little bit of support from industry and philanthropy, but then we also, the way that we continue to operate is based on our product sales, as well as our classes, which we have I'll tell you a little bit in the future and right now after the tasting, but we have quite a bit of a class schedule coming hopefully for next year, and hopefully in person as well. But please visit our online shop, where you're not only going to find these two oils, you're going to also find our garlic oil that is fantastic. It's garlic bread, instant garlic bread once you put it on some bread. And then also our vinegars and olive oil products for personal care.
All right. Well, what's the plan for the orchard and the center over the next year then? I see you've got some classes coming. And what are you planning to do in the orchard?
Great. Thank you, Andy. So these first picture is the two, this is our orchards, really. Now we have two. The super high density on the left that hasn't come to production yet. And the one that you tasted the oil from on the right, that's our more traditional medium density orchard where the trees are getting quite big. So what we did this year is we really started catching up on our pruning. And someone might say, oh, that limb is not pruned yet. Yes, we're still in the process of pruning. But the important thing is that we're reducing the height here and opening the centers of the trees to allow for more light and productivity. So we might have a little bit less yield in this orchard for the coming year, but we hopefully will maintain it for the future, as we have multiple varieties that produce quite an interesting aroma there and flavor. Mm-hmm. And then this is our super high density orchard in which we plan to have an internship in the future for students that can come and learn not only about how to manage and prune and fertilize and irrigate this field, but also about how to take data and collect, evaluate, prepare experimental designs, and look at how do you interpret the things that when we evaluate the different treatments that we have there. And then for classes, just to mention it really brief, we're going to have our first Spanish class in September. Information will be available in the website really soon. It's going to be a physiology/production class that we'll host in a farm that is called Showa Farm in Sonoma County. And that is coming pretty quick here. It's very limited in size. So it's a practical class as well as looking at information directly in the field. So if you want to sign up for that, it will be available very soon, but very limited and available space for this class. And then after that, we're also having a mobile milling class coming right around harvest time. We will be preparing that, and information will be available soon in our website. So keep in touch if you're interested. And then we have probably two classes that will be hosted virtually. One on milling, filtering, the step of milling that is very important, filtering the different types of filters available, and the different processes for doing the adequate filtering, as well as an irrigation workshop that we are working with multiple specialists from the UC Davis and the UC system to have available for you as a webinar online. So keep in touch, stay tuned, and you will find that information available in our website pretty soon. And then just to close our presentation today, I wanted to thank and mention, of course, Dr. Selena Wang. She's our research director. And many people in the industry know her, and she's an amazing collaborator, has come with one of some very high-end and game-changing research right out of our lab here for the Olive Center. And then, of course, Shirley. And I have the pleasure of having Shirley here today. I'm going to put on my mask and have her come into the room and introduce herself. Come on in, Shirley.
Thank you, Viri and Andy. I'll just be very quick. I hope you find this event educational and enjoyable, and we look forward to having you back in our future events.
Great. Now I need to wait for Shirley to leave the room. Okay, we're good. We're back online. And thank you, Shirley. Shirley's been an amazing collaborator. If you have taken a class here before, you have probably met her, but she's also in charge of helping us with the formulation for our products coming every year. And we'll be helping out with many things, including classes in the future. Thank you, Andy.
All right. Okay, so we have some questions here. to answer. One of them says, I think they're confusing odor and aroma. But what is the difference between odor and aroma? I think you meant odor defects. Because what they heard is that you said extra virgin oil has no odor.
Oh, no. I hope I didn't say that. Extra virgin olive oil has a great. Well, Andy, you help me out here with the odor and aroma difference. But yes, it has odor and it has aroma.
Right.
What Andy is referring to is the actual defect. So when you are smelling rancidity, for example, that crayon smell on an oil that has been stored for a long time, that is considered a defect, which will downgrade the oil from extra virgin to virgin or less. So it's that's what I was referring to earlier.
Okay. Now there's another question about the tasting. They're asking, do you know what it is in the oil that causes the pungency, the tingling in the back of the mouth?
Right. So olive oil has many phenolic compounds and polyphenols, and the actual compound, there could be a complex mixture of compounds, but the first one is called oleocanthal. That's the one that produces that tingly and peppery feeling in the back of your mouth. And that's again, oleocanthal would be the one that you're referring
All right. Well, now here's an interesting question. What does a tomato leaf taste like?
to. That is a great question. I did do that at some point in my life. Try the tomato leaf, the occasional tomato leaf, because if you're working in a tomato greenhouse, you're gonna have to taste it at some point, and it's not great at all. It's extremely bitter. That's where bitterness came in, and it's not something that people really try or taste at all.
All right. Now another question about tasting. Why do some olive oil tastings use bread to dip in the oil instead of just tasting the oil directly?
Well, that is not necessarily having anything to do with taste. I would say that is just a matter of pair. It's a very traditional pairing, because I think the bread, as it would cleanse your palate, also can reduce that astringency, that bitterness, that pepperiness, and combined with what you have, the texture that you have, and the liquid texture. And sometimes also people mix. I don't know if you go to any Italian restaurant, they're probably going to give you not only an oil but a vinegar to dip your bread in. So it's just a common traditional thing that is done. I don't think it has anything to do with tasting.
All right, here's a very important question. How much does what does the effect of the year of harvest have on the taste of oil?
The year of harvest has a very important effect on oil. As we mentioned before, oil does not get better with age, even if you store it under the right conditions. I was just visiting a producer in Sonoma County that, just as an experiment, had kept multiple vials over the years in their cold storage facility. So they gave me a sample of a 2017 Frontoio oil, that extra virgin olive oil. And it was one of the best oils, more award-winning and great oil. And they have kept it for 2017 in cold storage outside of the light. I brought it over here, and it was rancid. Although
What?
it has, well, 2017, and it's almost 4 years old. So it's an oil that at that point it was quite rancid actually, but it still had an interesting color. It was for being that old, I think that it was completely edible, honestly. Besides the fact of that rancidity that you would see in it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one person's asking, can you describe the specific defects that are found in olive oil? How do you describe those?
Okay, that I think that for the interest of time today, I'm going to mention them, but there's fusty, musty, there's different aromas that come with, or tastes that come with, of course, rancidity is the most important. Right. Then you have, let me see, I think I'm going to ask Shirley if she, you have winey also. That's another one that is very.
It must be good.
Yeah. I think that if I present to you a winey oil, and you will get it immediately.
Okay.
Yeah, and then fermentation, of course, in the oil.
Well, I guess if someone's really interested in this, then they should plan to sign up for one of your sensory classes, right?
Oh, most definitely. I think that if you should come to the class. One of our instructors, Sue, she's just fantastic at covering defects and going over those different off aroma smells that you can find in the oil.
So you mentioned that chemical that causes the pungency. What was it?
Oleocanthal.
So is that higher in the Oregon oil?
That's a great question. We have not tested that. I think just for fun, I'm going to ask a producer to send me a sample and then probably send it to both Shirley and Selena to see if they can determine that.
All right. And let me wrap up with one last question, which has to do with, I guess, home olive oil producers. They're wondering if UC Davis has an olive oil press that can produce oil for home growers.
So we do not. We actually process and mill all of our fruit, 100% of our fruit, with different collaborators. So this year, if you come to our mobile milling workshop that will happen at the actual Wolfskill Orchard, you will see the press that our collaborator Sam will be using to extract our oil right there on site. We're going to process about half of our yield through him. And then the rest we take to other different mills. We have multiple collaborators that very kindly donate their milling services to us, and because knowing that they're supporting the center's mission. So we really appreciate that, and maybe in the future.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up then. I want to thank you, Javier, for a wonderful and enlightening evening about learning about olive oil and tasting it. So now I'll turn to some future events. We have one scheduled already for next month about coffee, a forum presentation, Brewing a Better Cup of Coffee with Science. We'll have Bill Ristenpart, the director of the UC Davis Coffee Center, talk about his research into brewing coffee, in fact. And that'll be on September 15th, online, of course, as well. We also have a tea program we're brewing up for December and we'll have a special focus on campus food products in November. If you're on our mailing list, great, you're going to hear about this. If you want to stay in close touch, please follow us on social media. In closing, I'd like to thank our RMI friends for supporting these events and welcome you to join our Friends program. I encourage all of you, of course, to follow us on Facebook and hear about events as they're happening here in the RMI.